Hello, and welcome to Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud. Together, we'll explore ways to support teacher growth, elevate your coaching practice, and boost student success. Each week, I'll share my own insights, as well as conversations with inspiring guests to help you lead with confidence. Thanks for listening. Knowing students builds engagement. Our podcast guest today is Tim Smyth, whose post in Edutopia grabbed my attention. It's titled, Surveying Students Regularly Can Yield Valuable Connections. Being a promoter of creating ways to know students and having students know that they are known, I immediately sent an invitation to Tim and was pleased to get his quick response. Tim has been teaching for over 20 years and is an author and educational consultant. He focuses on making one-on-one connections with students by surveying them to gather information about their goals, challenges, and everyday lives. Tim shares his own lived experiences and passions, such as comics and all things hip-hop, as he encourages students to share their own experiences and passions in the classroom. Welcome, Tim.
Good morning, Steve. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I'm excited that you're here. As I read your piece, you shared that surveying students began as part of a professional growth plan. I'm wondering how you arrived at that idea. I do a lot of work with schools on building professional growth plans, and I talk about a professional growth plan should be the testing of a hypothesis. So I'm wondering what was the hypothesis you had in mind as you laid out your growth plan?
So the PGS, something that we have to do, and it's a really interesting way to do it rather than traditionally being observed, like you said, is coming up with that hypothesis. And so my idea was kind of getting to know my students more on a human level, getting to interact with them, weekly, bi-weekly, as much as I could. What would the impact be on the learning in my classroom? And I have found that it has had an immeasurably positive impact. And in fact, with these surveys, if I don't do them often enough, a lot of the times the students will say, hey, Mr. Smyth, we haven't done one of these in about 2 weeks. Can we do another? And so it's been a really impactful thing to build community in my classroom, and really just to kind of for the students to know that they're not just a number in my classroom. It's not just a percentage of what their grade is. And so I've gotten to know them in ways that, when you've got 5 classes and 30 kids in each class and you're going bell to bell, it's just not possible to do it in a ordinary way.
I'm really glad to have you label that, because frequently secondary teachers share with me the overwhelmingness, and I'm afraid too often put it aside as something that can't be done instead of looking at an alternative way to do it.
Yeah. And it doesn't take the place of, I try to physically interact with kids and talk with them and, hey, nice shoes, what's that book you're reading, those kind of things. But, if you're lucky, you might be able to, if you're doing it purposeful, maybe hit 20-25% of the kids every day. But this way I can hit 100% of the kids, once a week, like I said, in just a way that it's just not possible.
Well, talk to us about some of the ways that you do this in your article. And by the way, we'll make sure that your article gets tied in with a link here so that people can go find it. But you mentioned several different strategies that you use. So you want to kind of walk us through a couple of those?
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to write articles for Edutopia because technically you get paid by George Lucas. So as a giant nerd myself, it's kind of a neat thing. And I say this all the time when I work with teachers. If we don't share what we're doing in our classrooms, it's not bragging, but we're letting others control the conversation about education. And so as many times as we can share, that's a powerful thing to do. So I started doing this, I've been around for a while, and I was brought in with the idea of, don't let them see a smile until Christmas kind of a thing, right? Make them fear you at the beginning of the school year. As the year goes on, you can open up a little bit more, all those kinds of things. And I wish I could go back and change all that from maybe the first 10 years or so as I was teaching. Not that I wasn't kind and things like that, but I'd never really taken the human aspect with this. And so at the end of the school year, I would always show this great video, and that's in the article. The gentleman's name is Rick Rigsby, Lessons from a Third Grade Dropout. And he talks about how his father, was quote unquote only, a third grade student, and then he dropped out of school. But it's all about what his father taught him and how to overcome these obstacles in life and all these things. And it focuses on making as much of an impact on this life as you can while you're here. And, at the end of the year, the kids, it's great, it's easy to do. And I'm a giant introvert. But by the end of the year, you build your small family there. And then one year, my students made me promise to begin the school year with this video and the discussion. And so I did. And it was a terrifying experience to open up when I don't know these kids. And so I have anxiety, I have depression. I talk very openly with the kids about this. And as an introvert, but then we also talk about not letting these things get in your way. And so that, for me, that video is a way to kind of open up those conversations. And so I would always give that get to know me, survey at the beginning of the year. What books do you like to read? What are you into? All those kind of things that we do as teachers. And then you read through it and then you kind of put it in your binder and, you forget about it. And so now I do it about once every 2 weeks. And I change up the questions and I tie it into current events. And so in the video, like I said, he focuses very much on how you live in. And so that's the title of my survey. So just how you live in. And so it might be as simple as watch a short 5-minute video about the news, give me some feedback about it. And then honestly, just how you doing? What's going on this week? And sometimes it's as simple as that. Other times I might throw at them a 6 or 7 question survey. And it might be things like, towards the end of a marking period or when there's midterms. And I'll say things like, what are your major obstacles to finding success in school this year? And so it's not just about my classroom. It's about, the holistic approach of everything going on that I'm finding out. Because in a high school, you're not on a team. You're there's days go by where I don't really talk to other adults in the building because, we don't interact as much. And so it gives me a peek into these other classrooms. And then I'll say things like, another question is, what do you need the most help with? And it doesn't have to be with school. It could be with time management. It could be with studying. It could be with another teacher. It could be with my classroom. And then I ask, and this is always a hard one for them, where are you finding your greatest success in school right now? And for them, they're so used to, I only got this grade and I only got that grade, forcing them to talk about what they're doing that they're successful at. And so when I give grades out, a kid gets a C, a D, even an F, I can always find something in their work that was done well. And so I'll put stickers on their work and things like that. So they're not just that grade. Also in the survey, I'll ask, what is the one thing that you wish that I, as your teacher, knew about you? And that can be anything from, they might answer something silly to it might be something really serious. It might be something that they want to have a chance to share, but they're too shy to share it in class. And so it gives them that voice with me. And then I'll ask, reflect on our class this year. How are we, and for me, that's really important. How are we doing? Not just you as a student, but how am I doing as a teacher? What's working? What's not working? And I've been teaching long enough that I'm okay with stopping a lesson right smack in the middle of it if it's not working. And if there's a principal, right? If there's a principal in the room, it doesn't faze me in the least. And I think that's an important piece of education is that I fail too as a teacher. And so that's also being human. What's a goal you have set for yourself this year? And it might have nothing to do with school. It might have to do, I've heard about weightlifting. I've heard about wrestling, swimming times. I've heard about marathons. I've heard about entering into contests. I've heard about all kinds of neat things that the kids are doing outside of my classroom. And by the way, this helps a lot when I write college recommendations as well, because I'm not just writing about grades and things, right? And then the only other one that I really change up with is, and I found a lot of value in this because I got really upset. You give the kids a lot of feedback, you give them an assignment, and some of the kids look at it and then they throw it in their bag or, they never look at it. And so I don't give them a grade for major assignments. They have to grade themselves. And so part of that survey is, what did you do well? What do you need to work on? Those kinds of questions so that they're forced to use specific evidence, textual evidence, high school teacher, from my feedback. And then they get to share what they did well, what they need to work on. They pair share with a partner, and then they have to grade themselves. And usually I find the students grade themselves way too harshly. They're way too hard on themselves. And it's really neat to say, they grade themselves and I gave myself a B or a C, or I'm like, oh no, actually, this is the grade I'm going to give you. And so then, you see them puff up, you see them to be very proud of themselves, and it makes them part of the process rather than just they come in, there's an assignment on their desk, and then you just teach. It's a lot different to have them part of the conversation.
Wow. You pumped a whole bunch of things out here for me to follow up.
Sorry.
No, I'm really glad. The first one I got to tell you is the timing is very interesting because I'm working with 3 different schools currently with teachers taking a look at feedback to students on work, and that issue that kids don't pay any attention to graded feedback is one of the first ones that we jump into. And I'm wondering, because you're surveying the kids and getting their input along the way, I wonder when you bring that around to an assignment where you're asking them to give their assessment of their work, whether they jump into that a little better than students would if a teacher just begins with that, asking them to look at their work and figure out the feedback they got from the teacher.
Yeah, that's an important piece of it. And I think COVID really brought this home for me, because even though my kids were at home and on the computers, we had already built this community. And so we were still able to maintain those relationships, even though it was on the screen. And so, and the way that I do this, I don't know if I said this in the beginning, but we have Schoology for our learning platform, but whatever you might have, chalkboard, whatever, but they submit this in writing digitally. Most of the things I do in my classroom does not involve computers, but in this case I do. The kids get used to it. It's part of the pattern. It's nothing new for them. But you're right, because in the beginning of the year, it's funny when you look, because their get to know me survey in the beginning of the year, really short answers, because here's this old guy up in front of the room. I don't know who he is. But by this time in the year now, the answers I'm getting, wow, that I would never have gotten, at the beginning of the year. And then they continue to get deeper and deeper and deeper as the course of the year goes. And there's some kids that will never go beyond, a couple of words, and they don't feel comfortable sharing a whole lot. And that's fine too. It's not a forced therapy session. That's not what I'm here for,
That probably tells you something as well, though.
Yeah, agreed.
The degree of what they share with you. Well, listening to you now, you triggered another piece that I had written down here, and it sounds like there's some risk taking and vulnerability that's necessary. And I think I heard you say you model that, and then I'm guessing as the time goes on, students become more and more comfortable taking that risk and being vulnerable in their responses to you.
Yeah, I just got a note in my mailbox to start the day on Monday, and it was a note from a student, and you get a handwritten note from a teenager, like, wow. But the gist of it at the end, she said this one sentence of, "Thank you so much for sharing about your vulnerabilities and about some of the struggles in your life. I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one." And that, yes, I want them to write 5-paragraph essays and research papers, and I want them to know about our government and question things and be civically engaged. But I also want them to know that they're a human being and that they're seen.
Yeah, powerful. And the other one, I'll stick this in for the listeners, a resource. But I've pointed people a couple times to a presentation from Search Institute that looks at student relationships. And they have something that they call the 4 S's interview, that the teacher working, especially looking at a student who's struggling, or the teacher has questions about him, but they talk about uncovering the student's 4 S's. And the 4 S's are sparks, strengths, struggles, and supports. So the sparks is, what's your passion? What are you interested? What do you see as your strengths? What do you see as your struggles? And then what are the places or the people who support you? And so as I was listening to you go through the various questions you're asking kids, it sounded to me like all four of those are likely to pop up at some time.
Yeah, I like that though. That idea of like Mr. Rogers would say, look for the helpers. I like that. I might actually work that into my surveys. Who's that around you? Who's helping you? I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah, yeah. Because if a kid says nobody, then you got one you really need to zero in on.
Yeah.
I touch on that when I work with high schools looking at advisee programs where a teacher is serving as an advisor to a group of kids, and I share that you don't have to be the kid's person, but you need to know who that is.
Yeah.
Like if you know the kid's into baseball and they got this connection with their coach, and you know that if a problem comes up, that's the person you can turn to. But
Yeah.
if what you uncover is that a kid has nobody, then as an advisor, that comes a spot where you really got to look at how you zero in.
Yeah, we do a lot of mentor relationships as well, and a lot of times the kids will sign up for it on their own, and they kind of give a listing of their different interests and things, and we try to match adults with them, and it's a really really powerful experience on top of everything else that we have to do as educators. But there's certain things that are just more important.
Yeah, bingo, bingo, bingo. And actually, that takes me into my next question. Then
Sure.
is I frequently talk when you're asking people to look at something that they might do in their teaching, what I call the cost benefit link. So if you're going to take this on to make this change in your teaching, what's it going to cost you to do it? And then as you're weighing that cost against the benefits. So I'm wondering, as you look at the work that you're doing here, what do you see as the cost? And I know that you're reading that the benefits are outweighing the cost to you.
Most days, it can be a lot. For one thing, if you're asking the kids to share information with you, you can't look at that a week later. It's got to be that day. They might be sharing about a sports game over the weekend. They might be sharing something that they're, stressed out about, and so, yeah, you got to set other things aside when you put those surveys out there. If you let it go a week, the kids are not going to buy in anymore. And sometimes I've had to get kids some serious help. You don't want a kid walking out the door on Friday and they say something that needs to be addressed. And sometimes we've had to do that. So there's that. And it's an emotional toll. And they talk a lot about that in education, that we've got, I forget what it's called, but we have that secondary stressors coming from the kids. And I have my own children at home too, and those stresses and things. But so yeah, if you're just getting your feet on the ground, and I'm a mentor to new teachers as well, and maybe this is not something that you get as involved in. Maybe it's something a lot simpler in terms of just ask the kids, say, hey, what's something going on this week? Maybe not make it on that deep of a level if you're not prepared for that. Because if you're not prepared to respond, you're going to break that trust with the kids. And so I say all the time, you can be a well-meaning teacher, but if you're not prepared for things to have certain conversations, you could actually do more harm. So this is something that, again, I've been teaching for a long time now. I would not have done my first couple of years unless I had somebody else to talk to who's had this kind of experience. I could share those kinds of things with me. But yeah, in terms of the benefit, I mean, it reminds me on a weekly basis why I'm a teacher. It reminds me and lets me connect with these kids and the laughter. And, I have best piece of advice I ever got was to have a good news binder when I first started teaching. And now I have multiple binders. And so a lot of these things I will print out, the cards, the emails, the things that we forget about, because teachers are really hard on ourselves. And if something goes wrong, it can ruin my entire day or week or what have you. But I'll go home and I'll flip through that good news binder. And so for me, it's not just about saving the kids. This literally also saves me too. Yeah.
Wow. Hey, I hadn't thought about the benefit that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think compassion fatigue is what you were.
That's it.
Is that the phrase? Yeah.
That's
compassion fatigue. This is actually an antidote to compassion fatigue. You're seeing the payoff and the benefits from that stress that comes from tying into the lives of the kids.
Yeah. And it also opens up the conversation that their teachers are people too, and their principals and their guidance counselors. Everybody in that building is going through something every day. And I think if we see the world that way, it changes the way we react, because a lot of times those negative interactions really have very little to do with me and that child. It has to do with external type things. And this has helped me to be much more understanding of that.
Yeah, early on, you used the word human, and that's powerful. So let's find out one new piece about you. When I went to your website and I saw that you were called the comic history comic, was it?
Yeah, on social media, that's me, History Comics, and my email is History Comics Guy. And I always say I should kind of switch my legal name to that comic guy. But yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So this all kind of came hand in hand. I had years ago, long story short, was on my way out of teaching. It was an awful year, had nothing to do with what was going on in my classroom. And I started looking around for who knows what else I was going to do. And I realized if I was at that point, then I want to teach the way that I want to teach. And I never brought in, I'm a rule follower. I never brought in hip hop. I never brought in comics, those kind of things. And when I started to, I had students who reacted in ways that just opened up the door. The nerds like I was in school that didn't have an outlet, and here's this old white guy talking about hip hop and, just, yeah, right. So staying relevant with the kids. And so I just started doing my thing, and I started writing articles for PBS NewsHour, and I travel around the country and I present at Comic-Cons and libraries, and I do professional development for school districts. I've taught at the University of Pennsylvania. I worked for the U.S. State Department. We did work across the world on comics and education and things. And if nothing else, I would say to find that thing that you're passionate about as a teacher. And if you can bring that into your classroom, it changes everything. And it really made me fall in love with teaching all over again. And my administration, my district has been very supportive, and, I do my thing. And yes, we do everything else. I'm a very challenging teacher. You can ask my kids, they'll tell you that. But because I'm passionate about things, they're passionate about things, and you put it all together, and it's really been cool.
Well, this has just been great, Tim. So what's the best way for listeners to get back in touch with you or follow up if they have a question?
So my website, probably the easiest thing, is teachingwithcomics.com. You can reach out to me there. I've got lots of free lesson plans and ideas and resources and all that stuff that's there. I would say just start there. That's an easy thing to do. I'm always happy to talk to people about these types of things.
Well, we'll make that happen. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. A really great conversation.
Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barkley, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barkleypd.com.